Let's give an example, for example, on Kibaki term. I think we did a mistake during Kibaki time in that he came in, we given him only 2 terms, and the 2 terms he have done marvelous. But the constitution removed him in that he could not go further. But I believe if we could have given him 1 or 2 terms, again, maybe we could have reached the status of Malaysia or Singapore or any other person. So that's why I said, surely is it advisable to remove somebody because of a term limit while he's performing? So I was thinking maybe if we give any president for you to implement your agendas, clean up the mess of the other previous government or whatever it is, you're given a 5-year term to do that. And then you implement 2 or 2 terms again, you can do something. But I believe 2 terms is not enough for somebody to implement the agendas he wants.
The Fafi Member of Parliament, I believe is a first-timer.
Salah Yaqub.
Salah Yaqub.
Yeah.
Okay, so we made a mistake with Kibaki. Let's take a look at, other places. We should not have let him go after 2 terms. He did well. Let's do away with the term limits and put in place age limits. Linus, what's going on here?
With all fairness to the Fafi MPs, a new MP has been elected the first time.
First time, yeah.
And I don't know where he was in 1988. Because this is exactly the language of the newly elected KANU members who are elected through the corrupt Mlolongo system.
Long queues became short queues.
Long queues became short queues, and these were the new MPs. And in 1988, and this is the reason we actually eventually got multipartism, because now the extremes of the 80s and the 70s were put on steroids in the late 80s and 90s. Now, where people actually actively came to now suggest that President Moi should be president for life, we should declare him, because there were no term limits at the time, by the way. But some suggested that, he should be declared a president for life. In those delegations that would go to State House, this was the language. God loves you, and Koigi Wamwere once told me when I was shooting the documentary Moi, Moi and Muigai, that at some point he was invited to State House actually just after multipartism, and he was shocked by the type of accolades that were flying there. He went with people who then came out of State House and declared that, we saw light coming out of the president's jacket, a bright light that looks, yes, we saw a halo over his head. This is... It is political drunkenness, where you now lose your reality. You think there is this invincibility, you are here forever. And that is where KANU was in 1988. I remember we were students, and we went to perform in those 10 years of Nyayo era, and I remember my role was I was a passenger in a Nyayo bus, and I was to look really happy. So Yaqub needs to review his history and the history of this country, because there are things that don't look possible about Kenya now going forward. And one of them is a presidential term limit. It was one of the most contentious issues that drove a lot of people to pay the price of fighting for reforms and coming up with a democratic system that then assures that voters will every 5 years, up to a maximum of 5, assess the people, a maximum of 10, assess their leaders. And that is what has happened since 1992. It's been very smooth. We've had how many smooth handovers now? 3 very good ones, from Moi to Kibaki, Kibaki to Uhuru, and Uhuru now to Ruto. And there'll be Ruto to someone else, whether at the 10th year. Now, this kind of talk, normally, in my view, is informed by the political air of invincibility. Because right now, Kenya Kwanza sits in a very invincible place. Weak opposition, disorganized, still smarting from the election laws. Really, right now, Kenya Kwanza UDA is having a very good political space. And that's where you'll see some of these utterances that don't sound coherent coming out, like, can we then have remove the term limits and things like that. Before that, you remember, there was also talk of merging parties. Those are the things, that's the environment. It's the sort of environment the National Rainbow Coalition was in 2003. I remember the likes of Kiraitu Murungi saying Moi should go home and watch TV and see how the country is run. So politicians tend to get excited and shoot through the stars and make very crazy remarks, including this very outlandish suggestion that Kenya can actually revert to a no presidential term limit kind of environment.
And replace that with an age limit. Salad Malicha on Twitter says, in politics, nothing happens by chance. This was purely intended and it has served its purpose. This is how it works. Use a little known MP to announce your intentions, to gauge public reaction, deny, then retreat and come up with strategies to execute real intentions. Chester Nyantika says the suggestion or thought by Fafi MP on replacing term limits with age limit is very reckless, misplaced and selfish. Even the best dancer exits the scene for others, as did Dr. Julius Nyerere in 1985 next door in Tanzania. But wait, before Francis comes in, the Fafi MP says, yeah, whilst it's his idea, you know, no, he says, before we get to that, he says it's a matter he has discussed with others. So it's perhaps not just his thinking alone. Let's listen.
I believe in. It's something we discussed with quite some number of legislators. I don't want to mention names. It has nothing to do with UDA, it has nothing to do with ODM or any other person. It is something to do with Kenyans. And those of us who are discussing it were Kenyans, MPs, and even the locals. I believe in that, that sentiment I said, that the term limit should not be 2 terms, and the person should be removed through the ballot, not by term. That's what I mean. If it goes to that level, then it should be something to do with age limit. Mine is either 2 options, through the ballot or through the age limit of 75.
There's a tweet you just read that in politics there's no coincidence. Maybe, maybe not. Back in the village in Banana, once again, I keep borrowing local wisdom there. They say, if you want to know what is in a bush, you don't go into the bush and find out what's there.
Poke a stick.
You throw a stone and then relax. If there will be a gazelle or a squirrel.
Whatever will rustle out of the bush.
Yeah. You could be thinking there's a lion, kumbe it's a squirrel. You could actually be thinking it's an antelope, then a hyena comes out. So I don't know whether this was a stone thrown into the bush, just to find out what's in the bush. But be it as it may, it is always good to draw some situations from around. Number one, if you were to look at it from an official point of view, as we speak now, there's no bill whatsoever seeking to amend the constitution to remove the term limits for the president and replace that. And
it would require a referendum, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At least for now, there's no bill, there's not even a draft that we have seen. But it's a discussion that is out there, including here on the News Gang. So it tells you about that stone throwing into a bush, maybe. Number two, what would it take to remove the term limits? Yeah. It would take that parliamentarian to draft a bill, bring it to Parliament, members of Parliament support him in their majority in both houses, take it to a referendum, let the people make a decision. The BBI process, the court process from High Court to Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court, has given us a clear template on how to amend the Constitution. So anyone who will attempt to amend the Constitution, whichever part of the Constitution, you know, if it requires a popular initiative, you know what to do. Yeah. If it is a constitutional route, you know what to do. So at least we have now a template. But hey, not so long ago, I remember covering an event in a neighboring country, Rwanda. We were told the people want to remove the term limit. And it was done in a very colorful manner. We all know the results. I am not in any way saying that that is the situation that we are looking at, but hey, this is a constitution. There have been attempts to amend it, and successfully so. I will not be surprised if in the future, now or in the near future, there will be an attempt to amend the constitution, be it the term limit of the president or any other part of the constitution. So for now, as we speak, it is a situation where somebody has thrown a stone into the bush, and wanted to see what will come out of it. The reaction by the public is out there, including the reaction by the politicians, including a reaction by the Kenya Kwanza team that has totally disowned that Fafi member of parliament.
So let's listen to Silvana Sosoro, and he had a few interesting things to say about the Fafi MP. He called him an attention seeker.
An attention seeker. He does not speak for the party. So that is not the position of the party. And I speak that with authority, that there is no such thinking that we need to review the constitution to extend the term limit. In any case, by the way, I mean, such is not the discussion to put right now. By the way, if that one comes to the floor of the House, we will reject it. The Fafi member of parliament does not have the locus standi to speak on behalf of the president. He has no locus standi to speak on behalf of Kenya Kwanza. He has no locus standi to speak other than to speak for his own people in Fafi. And with that story, we need to put an end to that discussion. There is no such discussion within Kenya Kwanza coalition. It is utter imaginary. I call it fantasy thinking. It is fake as it looks, and I think he's earned his popularity as he wanted, but it can't get to the floor of this House.
So, proposal denials that it's got anything to do with the party. Fafi MP says he's spoken to some MPs about it, he won't name them. Osoro says that has never been discussed in the party. But this is familiar, isn't it? We've seen this in other countries, Linus. Rwanda, we've seen that in Uganda.
Very familiar. And I think the first disclaimer that we should make here is don't trust anything those politicians say. Don't. Actually, I mean, do we have a small, simple illustration? Just the other day, the same House was pretending to reject certain cabinet nominees. And then the same House again goes into this chorus of accepting.
And adopts.
The same politicians talk about corruption, but they want a horse trading between Waluke and other suspects. You know, for politicians, it's about horse trading. What do you have in it for me?
Interests.
Interests. And why we should not be trusting them is because look at the BBI itself. The BBI process. The BBI process was going to significantly change the structure of the executive. It wasn't going to remove the term limits, but it was going to really, really change the structure of the executive and also calculate it in such a way that power will always revolve around certain spaces. That was the calculation, in my view, behind BBI. But back to the presidential term limits. Examples of Uganda and Rwanda, and I've covered, I think, all those processes, including the referendum in Uganda to remove the term limit. At some point, there was one to introduce age, and age was introduced with a clear plan in mind, and the plan was, how do you stop the likes of Kawanga Semogerere from running for office against President Yoweri Museveni. Politicians calculate with, even if it's about constitutional changes, they have names in mind. You know, that this is the name that you have, and so 75 is about keeping Francis, who is approaching 74, out of the race in 2020. You're not, by the way.
Says who? I could.
Yeah.
Term limits.
Yeah, so that you lock them out. But I say this with caution. I don't like drawing the examples of Rwanda and Uganda because we don't have same stories. Our background is not the same. And they have struggled, and in fact, for them, they have changed regimes through the power of the bullet and the gun. We have not done that.
Yeah.
We've changed our presidents through the ballot. Uganda, by the way, has had more presidents than Kenya, but President Museveni has seen all the presidents in office except Jomo Kenyatta. He's been there all through, across all of them.
40 years now. Yeah.
Across about 3 popes. I mean, that's really long. That's now what it looks like to have a no term limit. Which is, I'm careful about comparing us with Uganda and comparing us with Rwanda because we have different stories. What will always form reference for us is the struggle that really informed multipartyism, and then that informed the 2010 constitution. You know, it wasn't delivered on a silver platter. It came through long processes. And I just want to refer you to the decision of the High Court on BBI, decision of the Court of Appeal on BBI, decision of the Supreme Court on BBI, especially when it comes to the basic structure. We wrote it. This constitution was written by experts who knew there'll be days like this. There'll be people like this who actually want to change the constitution, which is why they came up with Article 255, which specifically says in 255(1)(f) that if you want to change the term limits of the president, you'll have to follow the referendum. It's a referendum question. It's not a question that you can address in the floor of the House. Yeah. So you still have to take it to the people. I want to trust that. I know we've been degenerating even as a quality of the voter, and quality of the elected. But I don't think we've hit rock bottom where we can actually start comparing ourselves with Uganda, that, you know, we can have a president that will live there timelessly in State House without term limits. So I'm very careful about using the Uganda and Rwanda examples, but it's been done elsewhere. I just don't think our structure allows it. Even the way we've written our constitution, it's written in such a way that it takes care of cheeky propositions like the one that we are having now to change.
So, Francis, what are we to make then of all of this? You know, like you said at the beginning, there's no proposal, there is no bill. This is just somebody expressing his thoughts, his suggestions, perhaps an intention. You know, in fact, I believe he says, you know, that I think we have that soundbite. Let's listen to that. We can come back and hear from you, where the Fafi MP says it's his idea, but he, you know, ends by saying the Constitution will be amended whether today or in future. Let's listen.
Yeah. And, those statements, first, I want to make it clear. It's not a party stance. It has nothing to do with the current president. It has nothing to do with the government. It has nothing to do with anybody else other than Kenyans. This is a debate which will have come, which will come and will continue to come. For one, it's a debate about the Constitution. And the Constitution, as you know, is not a biblical version of the Bible or the Quran. The Constitution can be changed, can be amended, and will be amended, whether by our generation or the generation to come. And the amendments start from an outburst or a sentiment by one or two people. And that's why I brought up this issue of the term limit.
I listened to the last bit.
Yeah.
The Constitution will be changed, whether now or in the future, and it will begin with an outburst or a suggestion.
Yeah. So is that what
like
this is?
I don't know how good my cooking skills are, but when you
I wouldn't trust them.
Yeah. when you're preparing mandazi, for example, there's that piece of dough that, the first part, if you want to test how hot the mafuta is, don't throw the whole thing. A small bit, then you can tell. So maybe it's a small one for future. For now, because there's nothing to work with, there's no bill, there's not even a draft or even a written suggestion to amend the Constitution. So for the time being, I would propose that as a country, let's ignore this discussion, but let's not forget about it. At the back of our mind, let's keep it somewhere. If it resurfaces in a more structured way, then we'll remember, you remember the Fafi MP? He once raised it. So for the time being, let's go on with other more important issues, but let's keep it at the back of our minds. And it's also important to remember that the people who drafted the Constitution and Kenyans in their wisdom, 60% plus in 2010, they said they want a president who will serve a maximum of 10 years, 2 terms. It's not so much about quantity, the number of years that you will govern. Yeah. It's so much about quality. In those 5 years, 10 years, what will you do?
But I've seen some suggestions.
If you can't do it in 5 years, 10 years, I don't think you will do it in 100
You will ever do it.
years.
Because I've seen another suggestion, I think, on social media about saying, okay, so let's have one term for 10 years. And in that term, it's non-renewable, you know, you don't come back for a second term, and you do everything you want to do in the 10 years, and you say goodbye, and you leave. But so, are we being taken through the motions here? Is there something that will happen in the next year, 2, 5, 10 years?
You never know.
Or is this just nuisance, distraction, conversation to maybe take our attention away from something else that is more important?
You never know. It could be very many factors. Diversion of attention, and so many other issues. I mean, we are a country that has many issues, but also we are a country that starts preparing for the next election immediately this election is completed. So all those factors are at play. And that's why my suggestion would be, just keep it at the back of your mind as we go on with other things.
Yeah.
For that one term of 10 years, what if you get somebody who is not the best? Are you saying persevere with this person for 10 years? And also remember, the process of removing a president from office is such a difficult process. So I think the wisdom of the drafters of the Constitution still suffices. That, hey, have 5 years, let's see what you can do. If you satisfy us that you can do it, we'll give you another term of 5 years. You continue, call it quits, it's a wrap, go home, give another person an opportunity to lead. And that way, you have a more structured way of governance. Otherwise, we may end up with a scenario where you have a president for life. And it is not a far-fetched idea. We have seen it happen around us.
Linus?
I think, Francis, Yvonne, what we've seen from our decades of independence is talk of changing the Constitution has always been used to galvanize certain political conversations because it works like magic. It works so well. First of all, it really, increases the profile of whoever is involved in that. First-time MP is now a name that we all ask and say, who is that?
Yeah.
And two, remember, it can actually go to the next stages where you see it in rallies that let's change the Constitution, because it feeds politics and it feeds it very, very well. Just the same way in the 70s, the Change the Constitution movement, change that clause about the vice president succeeding the president for 90 days, change that. You know, and it took about 3 years before Charles Njonjo stopped it on its tracks. If you look even at the last 4 years, BBI did inform a lot of political conversation. And former President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga on one side, and former, now President Ruto on the other side with his team, opposing the BBI. It forms very good conversation, and it's a very nice way of actually creating the two blocks that we are looking for in a political conversation. Just remember the 2005 referendum on the Constitution. It wasn't a referendum on the Constitution at all, Francis. It was more about Mwai Kibaki and Raila Odinga squaring it out for the differences they had in 2003. Remember the promise that and the MOU that he was supposed to become prime minister, then that fails. So the battle moved to Bomas, and then the two sides now formed, and it became a battle between Raila Odinga and Mwai Kibaki. So politicians will always use the Constitution as a pretext to fight some huge national battle. Now, in all fairness to the MP for Fafi, constitutions are changed. Yeah. Constitutions can be changed. They can be amended. Only that, like I emphasize, the drafters of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 really looked back at our experiences. Because the MP for Fafi is running behind time. He would have fitted perfectly in the 80s, because you say something you want to change, you change. That is how the old Constitution was amended. Yeah. Some of it was amended, during the one session of Parliament. Yeah. It's drafted very quickly, it goes to the House, and the law is passed. For example, removal of Section 2A of the Constitution was done in record time. Yeah. Who was the proposer and the seconder? Mwai Kibaki was involved. And in actually making KANU the single party in law, you know, completely. Kenya is a single party state. Mwai Kibaki was also involved, as was, I think, Charles Mugabe Njonjo in removal of Section 2A. This again goes to what you should, don't take, or take what politicians say with a pinch of salt. Some of those that you are seeing are ardent defenders of the Constitution. Should they see the possibility that it's actually possible to create a termless presidency, they would actually switch sides. So in all fairness to the member for Fafi, he just needs to appreciate our history, one. He also needs to appreciate we are not Rwandans, Ugandans, Ethiopians, or Cameroonians. How long is the president in Cameroon in office now? Over 40 maybe?
40 years.
Yeah. We are not, we are past that. So there'll be certain things that will be very, very difficult to do, even at a basic level. And those are the things that will be against. He needs to read 255 and 256 on how we amend the Constitution. It's not easy. Ask Team BBI.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman, Yvonne, here called Vincent Gekonge. He's telling you, but at least the Fafi MP has put Fafi on the national map. At least now people know there's a constituency called Fafi.
Yeah, but do they know where it is, though?
Yeah, it is in Garissa County, by the way.
Do they know where it is?
Probably they will now.
There is no constituency you don't know, Francis. But
No, he's saying all of us, including Kenyans.
Yeah.
But I also look at it this way. When you hear such things like the Fafi MP is saying, he may make it sound like a suggestion. But for me, I look at it this way. It's not so much about what him and the fellow political players say, it's so much about what they don't say. I think that's where the story is. Not what he's saying, but what he's not saying.
And you say that a lot.
Yeah.
It's in what they don't say.
Yeah, it's what they're not saying.
Yeah.
That's where the story is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So as we, prepare to close the show, we will see what happens if this was all just something that, distracted us and took our time. And, we spent a couple of minutes or days debating about it. We're about to close, but I want to read this text from lawyer Muthomi Thiankolu, and this is about the conversation that we had earlier. And he says, the politicization of the criminal justice system is part of colonial legacy. The real issue is whether we are willing to end that legacy. So, interesting thoughts there around, where we are.
Yeah, on paper we have ended it.
Yeah.
On paper, the independence of the institutions, if it was to be interpreted very well, and let's not even restrict it to the DPP alone. IEBC is supposed to be very independent. The Teacher Service Commission, very independent. Which other institution, Francis? There are quite a number of constitutional commissions that are independent. Now, you see, the Constitution must be lifted off its pages by people who mean to interpret it correctly. And I think that's the problem we are having right now with the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
We need to have people who can have the courage to read 157 properly.
So that's letter versus spirit, huh? That's that thing. We have it good on paper, but are we in the phase of constitutionalism?
Yes.
Is that, yeah, all those big fancy words. Sorry?
Professor Okoth Okombo was very...
Yes, that's right.